Darktide is a 4-player, co-op horde shooter. It's an FPS game in the same vein as Left 4 Dead and Deep Rock Galactic. Darktide, however, is set within the Warhammer 40,000 universe. And if you don't know what that is, imagine this. Take Lord of the Rings, except remove everything. Remove the emotional themes shown through the hobbits, remove the adventurous tone shown through the Fellowship, and only focus on the conflict, on the war between Mordor and Gondor, and build a setting just around that. That is Warhammer Fantasy. Now take that, except imagine everyone has guns, and everyone has power armor, with the world building and aesthetic of Dune. That is Warhammer 40k. The premise of Darktide is that it's set within the Mobian Domain, a rich and well-off star system that produces vast quantities of supplies and armies, important to the Imperium, critical for the neighbouring star systems, for these other sectors pale in comparison, many of which rely upon the Mobians for supplies and protection. For on the edge of the Mobian Domain are a string of planets. On them lies a wave of darkness that threatens to consume the sector. There are brutal horrors out there, alien creatures, predators, xenos species, monsters and worse, who want nothing more than to extinguish the fluttering flame of human civilization. This force is locally known as the Darktide. This seemingly unstoppable force is held back in a campaign called the Fringe War. Only by the efforts and sacrifice of the Mobian Imperial Guard is this invasion contained. However, upon Tertium, the capital city, resting upon the capital world of the sector, Atoma Prime, there is a threat brewing from within, a rebellion. One that has been in the making for years, slowly accumulating in numbers and strength. These rebels are fanatical, demon-worshipping cultists, seduced by the same corruption from the Darktide. This cult launches their uprising in a bid to overthrow the planet into darkness. In their eyes, they see themselves as liberators. Their timing was impeccable, however. The only regiment that was not tied down in the Fringe War was the Mobian 6th, the most decorated, celebrated and famous of the Mobian regiments, an elite fighting force, fully trained, armed and experienced, returning to deal with the crisis at home. Yet they had turned. Long ago, they had slowly been corrupted, turned into traitors, turning upon humanity, sieging the capital, joining forces with the cultists, and turning the crisis into a disaster that threatens to destroy the capital. The fate of the city stands on a knife's edge. The local law enforcement and planetary defense forces are being overrun, hanging on by a thread. With no other force able to deal with the crisis, desperate times call for desperate measures. You play as a convict. You, alongside thousands of prisoners, have been press-ganged into a penal legion under the watchful eye of the Inquisition. You and your fellow convicts are a makeshift force, a desperate last-ditch attempt to possibly save the world. Taking a step back, let's begin with the visuals. Fat Shark has a lot of experience with exploring the Warhammer universe. This has been beautifully illustrated with Vermintide, which both games still stylistically hold up with its eye on art style and lighting. I can safely say that this attention to detail has been brought here as well. Even though most levels do look rather drab, considering we're fighting in a city that's stacked upon a city, I think they've done a pretty good job. From the small corridors to the more opened up rooms into the huge areas, the 40k scale is here, with some nice touches to really bring that feeling of a lived-in environment. You can see where people sleep, where they prayed, where they did their business, and where they went to work. Not only that, the animations and details in the game are really well done. Hitting the poxwalkers, you can see maggots fly out of their mangled bodies. If you have sharp weapons, it cuts through the enemies. Or if you have a blunt weapon such as a hammer, hitting a foe in the head caves in their skull. Enemies react to heavy weapons going off. Smacking and pushing hordes is fluid, dynamic and reactive. All of these animations and details are seamless. There is a variety to be found within the game, from the upper, cleaner and smarter areas of the city compared to the slums at the bottom, the scorching factories and rundown areas where the environment is taking over. Unfortunately, at the moment, the performance of the game is rather intensive. Once you start up the game for the first time, the settings are automatically set pretty high, with ray tracing on by default, which, if you have a strong computer, you may not notice this in the hub, but once you're in the game with hundreds of people on screen, you'll feel it then. Even with a pretty good rig, with the default settings, the game still churned on my end. After a bit of tinkering, you can balance the visuals with performance, although ray tracing really should be off by default. Another crisp part of the game is the audio.
Since I signed up for a reticus detail, I sure do miss fighting Xenos.
Maybe you like I'll die happy. There may be 1,000 Xenos races, but cleansing fire takes care of them all.
The voice work, the environment, the weapons, it all comes together and brings the city to life. It brings the universe to life. 40k games usually excel when it comes to music, and that is no different here. From the downtime to the amped up intensity of music blaring in your ears while fighting, all of it is fitting and engaging, demanding your attention. To help manage the fighting within the game, if you're not looking at an enemy and someone's about to hit you in the back, the game has a sound indicator.
Filled with corruption!
The game even has a sound indicator for when you're about to be shot at. These are actually obvious even when the music is going off. Speaking of the weapons in Darktide, they got it right. The bolter has finally been done justice. It is crunchy. It has a sense of weight. Even though this is the bolter designed for humans and not space marines, using it, shooting it, feels and sounds like a Herculean task, making the damage it does insurmountable. Running with this thing, brilliant. The las gun, something in lore that is a brilliant weapon, durable, reliable, deadly. You can accurately shine the Emperor's flashlight to every corner of his empire. It's great. The melee weapons, especially the classics, are just as invigorating and formidable as these weapons look. Even down to the smaller weapons such as the knives, the axes, the swords, chunky and impactful. You really feel the sense of weight that these mighty and heavy weapons have. Within the game itself, there are 4 archetypal classes: the Veteran, the Zealot, the Psyker, and the Ogryn. Once you've chosen your class, you then get to choose your background, choosing a planet to be born on. All these planets are within the Mobian domain, not you, making you a local within the system. I personally like this. It makes the planet and the war more personal on a narrative level. It makes me more immersed and connected to my character. Regardless, the most important part when making your character is the voice. This will determine the majority of your dialogue and personality. So pick a good one. Your background, your voice, your height, gender, and name are the only things you cannot edit once you've made your character. Once you're in game though, you can freely change the rest to your heart's content. I see what they're trying to do. Instead of just blanketly copying Vermintide 2's characters and just putting them in space, doing it this way, it ensures not only you can double up on classes, but when you keep playing, you may run into the same players, and you'll recognize those characters. Doubly so if you're playing with any friends. Those people become your team. With the archetypal classes, so far, they all only have 1 class each. It has been confirmed at some point there will be more classes to vary up the playstyles. However, for the time being, these 4 classes are as such. The Veteran Sharpshooter is ranged. The Zealot Preacher is the front line. The Psyker Psychonetic is support. And the Ogryn Skullbreaker is crowd control. You're expected to get your hands dirty, and all classes can absolutely do the main job of each class. The Zealot can just as easily snipe elite enemies, the Psyker can easily hold the front line, and so on. Unlike Vermintide, since you're not locked in with characters, you can stack up multiple classes, which can lead to fun combos. Or you could just run in with 4 Ogryns and just kill everyone. The gameplay loop is superb. It is not only masterfully done, but it has successfully added ranged enemies in a co-op shooter in a meaningful and engaging manner. With games like Left 4 Dead, Deep Rock Galactic, or Vermintide, the Horde primarily just charges at you, with an exception of maybe potentially having a special ranged enemy in the game. In this game, the main threat are the ranged enemies. As it would if the zombies were running around with guns, you know, you'd expect that. The Horde ties you down, and if you have the right weapon, they're more of an obstacle rather than a threat. The threat comes from the elite enemies within the Hordes, or the ranged attacks. It can be difficult to land hits on the actual threats, as the Horde use their bodies to almost shield them. Although Vermintide did this also, whereas Darktide differs with the ranged enemies. If they all aim and fire upon you, they will melt you. On the higher difficulties, this can happen in seconds. So what tools do you have to deal with them? The most obvious answer is to shoot back. If the enemy are out in the open, they can actually get suppressed. However, when they're in cover, they can't really be suppressed. And when they shoot back, it makes your weapon sway, effectively suppressing you. You can whittle them down with accurate shots, or lob a grenade, however you only have so many of those. So besides what you do in every other FPS game, what else can you do? You can charge them. Once you're close enough, it will literally tie down that enemy squad. They will all either charge with bayonets or whip out melee weapons and engage in close quarters combat. The game incentivizes melee characters to engage the enemy, and once they're tied down, they become easy pickings, and allows the ranged characters to do their job more effectively. However, the strategy is risky, as you have to put yourself in danger to charge ahead of the group to tie down those ranged squads. If you're just close enough, they'll try to open up on you, or fall back to regroup in a different position. You can actually dodge the enemy's ranged fire, just like how you can dodge their melee attacks. If you're running, however, you slide instead. You can actually even use the melee horde as cover, using their own strategy against them. This won't always work against the special enemies, but against the regular ranged squads, if they can't get a line of sight on you, they can't shoot. The game also choreographs the enemies in a striking manner. Whenever a special enemy appears, or a horde, there's a unique, recognizable sound alerting you to the threat.
Alright, press on through the maintenance area.
Comrades, we've got a pox bursting! That got their fatty!
And whenever they attack, they also have their own unique sound tied to that.
Precision fire! We have slain the Tox Flamer!
What also helps to make these enemies stand out from the horde is they all look different. Their silhouettes are distinct, so you can see the threat clearly and react accordingly. This applies doubly so to all the bosses, of which there are a few at the moment, but the one I really want to talk about, which exists in Left 4 Dead, but not in Vermintide, the Witch, a demon host.
Stay back. Maybe we'll awake. Demon host comes.
This being added to the game is really good. I think the game greatly benefits from this, especially when the environment is completely pitch black. The only thing that's lacking enemy-wise, I would say, would be the patrols from Vermintide 2. Usually this would be a group of elite enemies who march about, and you'd need to avoid them unless you want to fight a lot of armored ogrins basically. I think it would be nice to have them in, because once you have those god stats and all those perfect weapons, rolling on these groups becomes really fun. Speaking of things that are done really well, the map design. You can walk from one end to the other, no problem. The sense of moving forward is done well. However, the missions go on a rotating basis, which acts as a way to randomize which missions you tackle. Which, it's intended for a more varied and randomized experience. There's also different threats, such as higher and lower intensity missions that are just completely pitch black. Regardless, the map rotation, it makes sense in theory, however in practice, it's not exactly ideal. If you want to play a specific mission or map event, it's up to RNG. This becomes frustrating when concerning penances. Penances are basically achievements. By doing these achievements, you can get rewards such as cosmetics, new frames, and other customizable options. Some of these achievements require you to finish all map types as certain characters, or in certain difficulties. However, you have to wait and hope that these missions eventually show up. It doesn't help how some of these achievements don't actually track what missions you have done and what you haven't done. In Vermintide 2, it shows you exactly what you've done and what you need to do. It doesn't do this here, meaning if you want to get that cool frame or that really cool cosmetic, you're not only going to have to wait hours, but possibly days for that mission type or that difficulty to show up. Or even worse, if you never manually wrote down what mission you've done and what you haven't, you're going to have to guess for that as well. Most players have felt this frustration. The main genuine critique I have of the game are the mechanics on actually obtaining new equipment and upgrading it. The store is where you buy new equipment. You're flush with money, so getting new equipment is never an issue. And you'll have plenty of time to try out all the weapons available to your class. You'll be able to find what fits your playstyle the most. The store refreshes every hour with new weapons, which, I will say, compared to the loot box mechanic in Vermintide 2, I don't mind the store. The issues crop up once you find the weapon you actually like. The weapon stats are distributed at random. Now, you don't have to particularly worry about any of these until you reach the max level. At this point, you're in the end game. And this is where the shortcomings of the game, unfortunately, rear their head. The stat placement for the weapons is based on RNG. You have to log in daily, or hourly, to see new weapons in the store. You not only have to hope to see the weapon you like, but then if the stats are actually good, or if the stats are even distributed in the correct places. However, this issue can be compounded when you factor in the curios. These give massive buffs in combat, and sometimes out of combat. None of this would be an issue if you could upgrade your weapon at a crafting store, which they have. However, it's not actually finished. At the moment, it can only be used to change the perks of your weapon and to upgrade them. However, once you change a perk, it locks all the others, This is especially bad with curios. If you find a good curio at a low level, and you put resources in upgrading it to the max level, it may have some extra stats that are kinda wasted in something that doesn't affect your game, or doesn't affect you at all in the game. At that point, there's nothing you can do besides dealing with it, or getting a new one.
I trust you are pleased, Varlet.
Due to this, you're actually punished if you use the crafting resources to actually upgrade your weapons before you reach the max level. For once you hit level 30, the rarity and power of the items are objectively better than the early game. Because of this, you're left at the mercy of the RNG store for potentially high stat weapons and curios. And with the system not particularly being finished, this may be susceptible to change, but for the moment, this is what the end game boils down to. When gearing up for the most difficult missions, everything matters. So this becomes frustrating when the only way to get high stat weapons or curios is to wait at the store, which is why for large swaths of the community, instead of logging in daily or hourly, they just use this online extension. Look, it shows you everything you need to know in one place. I don't think the developers intended for this. It's why a commonly held belief is that once you reach level 30 with one class, you've seen all this game has to offer. This is why, as of within the first month or so of launch, a lot of people within the community are not recommending the game, which is why it's sitting on mixed reviews on Steam. This sentiment is understandable. A well-balanced and thought-out gameplay loop. However, the system supporting that is lacking, which leads to frustration from many players. These issues, however, only really show up during the late game, which is why all this negative press is coming through now. This is exacerbated due to the existence of the cosmetic store, which in of itself isn't bad. The frustration comes from the fact that people perceive the cash shop as fully finished, and many other aspects of the game as unfinished, leading people to the thought that this is where Fat Shark's priorities lie. However, ironically, that's not the issue I have with cosmetics personally. Many of these cosmetics don't fit with the theme of the Inquisition. To explain, within the promotional art, the colours of the Inquisition's warband are red and black. Makes sense. I thought this game would have created a sense of unity within the players. You are not just a part of any Imperial outfit, but you're an operative within the Inquisition. A uniform through colour. A great example is with this art piece, illustrating a deathcore of Krieg soldier, but in the style as an operative of the Inquisition. Almost like the Death Watch for the Space Marines. You notice immediately they're a part of a unique organization, but you can see where they're from, just by looking at their armor. Many of the cosmetic pieces don't fit with the Inquisition theme at all, many people looking like random Imperials from around the galaxy. I feel this is a huge missed opportunity for Darktide. This would have not only helped to solidify a strong and striking aesthetic within the already cramped 40k universe, but I feel it would have made players care more about this band of heroes. The story, however, at this moment in time, it leaves a lot to be desired. The premise is brilliant. The last line of defense of a city on the brink. Convicts who were once rejected by society, yet may very well be its salvation. As to what we actually see and experience in game is rather limited. The tutorial sets up your character, and leveling up within the game essentially serves as you gaining trust within the Inquisition. This is demonstrated through you being allowed to handle more potent and powerful weapons, and how NPCs talk to you on the Morningstar. To the point where you go from a convict, slated for execution, to a valued and experienced Inquisition operative. For the actual story within the game, well, as you go along, fulfilling missions and gaining higher ranks within the warband, you're clued into the fact that on the ship, there's a traitor among us. However, once you reach level 30, where you and some other convict are brought before a high-ranking member of the Inquisition, where he declares that one of you is the traitor, and the other will be formally welcomed into the Inquisition. Unsurprisingly, this traitor is not you. They die, you're welcomed in, then the game boots you back out to the hub. There's a few problems here. Let's start with what is not a problem. The cutscenes showing you gaining more trust within the Inquisition. I think that's a good idea, and it's done well. As compared to Vermintide 2, where leveling up thematically did nothing. even though gameplay wise, you became the destroyer of worlds once you hit the max level. And in fact, barring the last cutscene of Darktide, there aren't really many problems with this. The problem lays with the fact that there is no main story. There is no main narrative weaved through the levels. In the Vermintide games, we saw this throughout the levels, fighting back, either liberating areas of cities or taking the fight to the enemy, taking out their leaders before dealing a decisive blow, making the player think that, perhaps in this dark situation, there's a small hope that the heroes might snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Here, that is not the case. The missions have no greater narrative. No, the real issue is that the game, narratively, is still stuck in the premise. The premise being that this is a launched uprising. Even after getting the max level and high-end equipment, you are still just dealing with an uprising. This is in stark contrast from Vermintide, where the stakes are very much set in stone. You don't feel that here, you just feel that this is a routine uprising you have to deal with. This is why, for a great many players, their takeaway from the story was essentially, you get someone to meet someone who says you need to do better, or they ask why you're here, even though you summoned me. You do better, until at the end they say, you might be a heretic. Nah, JK, we got you, you're good. And then you're booted back to the hub, to do the end game, which isn't exactly complete yet. You can see why some players might be unsatisfied. It seems clear that Fatshark may possibly show off more of the story, more of the narrative of the degradation of the planet, or the Hive. This I feel is clear from the tutorial, with the hook of the heretic captain being broken out of prison. If this is the case, I feel it would have benefited the story greatly if the traitor that was caught didn't try to embarrassingly run away in a room with hundreds of soldiers, deep within a ship, of tens of thousands that's the size of a city in space. She should have lifted her arms, welcomed the shot, showing the steel resolve of the enemy. That alone would have been better, however, for a better hook, she should have said something either exclaiming that the Inquisition is hiding the truth from us, or that we can't stop their plan, or name-dropping a demon or a character who's leading the heretics. The reason why this is disparaging for many players is that within the advertisement and pre-release material for Darktide, it was stated that Dan Abnett would be the co-writer of the game, helping to spearhead the story and setting. He's written many quality 40k books, some of the best, I'd argue. However, looking into his work and the implications within the game, it seems there's one novel in particular that I feel has inspired Darktide, that being Dan Abnett's book Necropolis, a part of his Gaunt's Ghosts novels. I would give this novel a recommend. Go give it a read. If you don't want minor spoilers, skip to here. Within this novel, the premise is essentially a hive city under siege. However, it reaches apocalyptic levels. Any sense of an ordinary life is thrown to the wayside. The story starts with sirens going off within the hive city of Vervenhive, until on every siren on every level of the hive are ringing out. It's as if the city itself is screaming. The novel starts off jumping between perspectives from ordinary people, parents with children, miners deep underground, factory workers, rich nobles. All of their lives changed in a flash as the shelling starts. Artillery fire raining on the city, killing tens of thousands, killing off many of the characters we just saw. There is a second hive city on the planet, called Ferozoika. This is the city that has marched upon Vervenhive. The enemy force is so far away, they can't be seen or heard. The shelling continues unabated until a shield is lit up, protecting the center and majority of the hive, but not the outskirts. From here, the situation goes from bad to worse, as 1.5 million refugees get bottlenecked trying to escape the infernos of the outer city, trying to get into the hive's walls. A platoon of 450 tanks rush out to meet the enemy on the plains, only to be obliterated to 33 tanks. Vervenhive, a city of 45 million, can only raise, feed, train, and equip an army of 500,000. Yet the enemy from Ferozoika number in the millions, and their population was only 11 million. The other hive city of Ferozoica had gone dark and isolated itself for months. They had been corrupted by a demonic radio frequency. The whole city fell to this, and for months they prepared for war. Munitions, artillery, weapons, body armor, and horrible, hulking machines of war. Once they were ready, the entire hive city was emptied, as every single person, man, woman, and child within that city marched out across the wastes in a blood-fueled frenzy to slaughter and burn the loyalist Vervenhive down to the ground. All augmented, corrupted with guns and armor, the population of Ferozoica was 11 million, and that is the size of the army that is bearing down upon Vervenhive. Fortunately, Vervenhive's forces were supplemented by some reinforcements from the actual Imperial Guard, who happened to be close by from the ongoing crusade being waged in a distant star system. The city is pushed to the brink. Every walk of life within the city, clerks, miners, parents, gangsters, all of them pressed against an impossibly large force of millions of possessed inhuman hordes. These are the end times. This is a situation that is beyond hopeless. Fleeing off-world is not an option. Help from the Imperial Guard will not arrive in time. It's up to Sharp, Gaunt to save the day. It's good. Read it. The book has good characters, it makes you care about the struggle for the city, and it actually humanizes the artistic setting of 40k, making it seem more plausible, more real. The way it describes food, ammunition, and the overbearing and oppressive use of artillery. The point is, everything falling apart, the end times, should be here in Darktide as well. I feel this is the direction Darktide should go. This could not be done in 40k. The universe foreseeably will not end anytime soon. But it should happen for this sector, for this planet, for this city. As shown during the premise, neighboring systems rely upon the Mobian domain. It should be heavily leaned into that if this city falls, if this planet falls, then dozens of worlds and sectors will fall. But how to express that? I feel that would be easy, relatively speaking, through more maps, but not just more of what we have, but in new areas, showing new conflicts. Similar to the novel, if the city was under siege, there could be maps within trenches around the city, trying to move supplies forward, seal up areas of the front line where the enemies flooded in, or providing relief to a forward element, similar in tone to Fort Brackenburg from Vermintide 2. Create a real war zone. If you want to go a step further, you could add more environments to fight in. Specifically, the other planets within the system, having firefights on islands on the ocean planet, fighting within jungle environments on the food planet, or fighting in the space station above the water planet. This could easily be explained lore-wise by saying, due to the logistics being disrupted by Tertium coming under siege, certain Mobian regiments tied down to the Fringe War have either been wiped out or unable to contain the Darktide, resulting in new Xenos types or enemy types invading the other planets. It should be reinforced that the system is falling apart. In this vein, I feel Darktide can be related more to Vermintide 1 than Vermintide 2. With the story, Ubersreich is rather similar to Tertium. The game follows a band of unlikely companions brought together by the common cause of the Horde of Skaven. It is only after the game that they have proved they are an effective team, and that they saved the city, what's left of it. This, I feel, is similar to Darktide. I feel we should see the city Tertium being pushed to the brink, just like how the rest of the Reichland was starting to fall in Vermintide 2. For at the moment, it just feels like it's an incursion, not an uprising. I feel like it's under control, but we're being told it's spiraling out of control. In conclusion, should you buy this game? If you're a fan of Vermintide or other Warhammer games, absolutely. If you've actually played Vermintide 2, then you would understand how buggy and unfinished that game was. However, after a few months, or some would say a year or so, of updates, patches and DLCs, these touches helped Vermintide 2 come into form. That applies doubly so here. And actually, not that long ago, Fatshark released an open letter to the community. So I think this bodes well for the future. The core gameplay loop is beyond solid. Better than Vermintide's. It's just that there's a few other aspects of the game that need to be brought up to standard. Now, if you're not a fan of Warhammer, should you buy this game? In its current state? Possibly not. It's up to you. Playing it on and off for a few hours, every few days or weeks, would be fun. However, you'd need to go in knowing that the end game is rather sparse. So if you're on the fence, I'd absolutely encourage you to wait a while, see how the game's going. Perhaps you could even wait for a future sale to take place, knowing that within time, this game will come into better form, just like Vermintide did. I personally will continue to play this game, for compared to many other games out there, there's nothing quite like Darktide. If I'm to be completely honest, and wear my heart on my sleeve for a moment, this game makes you feel as if you're doing your part for humanity. Not playing as some general, or as a flawless warrior, or as a super soldier, or as a god, but as a man. And I'm glad we have a 40k game that can finally make us feel that. For me, that's the context behind Darktide. That's why I like it so much. Too bad it's only the second best 40k game. The first would be Fire Warrior.